Thank you. This is a reminder that tonight's meeting is being live streamed and will be archived. Also, just a friendly reminder to be sure that all cell phones are turned off. Thank you very much. Approval of agenda, that the agenda for the regular board meeting of November 19th, 2019 be approved. Moved by Trustee Cosmerly, seconded by Trustee St. Jean. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Preliminary declarations of pecuniary interest. Presentations, and I'm going to call on the Director of Education to lead this up with a very interesting, I hope, and timely enrollment figures.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope it's timely as well. And hopefully it's a good news story. So what I've done for you tonight is each of you should have a handout. So if you want to follow me, it looks like it's a long presentation, but it really isn't. It just identifies some key features, okay? But before we get into that, I just want to say, again, it's my pleasure to share with you the annual enrollment report. And it is fairly significant, as you know, because these numbers cannot be understated, right? These numbers provide us with a lot of information. So again, as the numbers are announced and submitted based on October 31st, and I might add March 31st, these are key for determining trends, and of course, teacher and support allocations, and of course, identifying the approximations for the grants for student needs. And finally, I would like to say that as we walk through this, we're going to be looking at certain features that should give us some insights, what we should be looking for, whether or not we're looking at stability, or we're looking at a trend and maybe one way or the other. So we'll walk you through it. So as always, we always start with the, we don't always start with it, but we're looking at the elementary. And the reason why we look at elementary, of course, is because those numbers become the benchmarks going forward. So if you have really good enrollment at JK, early learning, you hope to have them for 14 years, all right? And so that's the basis from which you want to work from. So if you look at the next page, and you're going to see, I guess it would be page 3, you're looking at the first yellow bar, and you're looking at the JK full-time. And an indicator there is if you look at the very bottom, okay, and you're looking at the total at the bottom, and if you see a number there, and I think the number reads 800, just a little over 800, and that is key for us. Anytime we're above 800 over the last few years, that shows that we have a little bit of stability going forward. Now, second to that, though, if you went through that line, if you went through right up to the top and you saw individual schools, what you'd be doing is you'd be looking at the JK full-time and you'd be comparing it with the SK full-time to see if there's a trend and if you're up or down. So that's just a good indicator in order for you to see whether or not there's growth in that community or there is not. Let's go to the next page. When you look at the grade 8 enrollment, so we're going right to the very end. So the reason why we look at the grade 8 enrollment, again, this number indicates to us how many kids will eventually be leaving the elementary system. And quite often what you want to do is compare grade 8 and JK to see if they're about equal. If they're about equal, that's great. If the JK is larger, that's awesome, because that means you're going to have a net increase the next year, at least you hope you do. Okay, and it also gives you, for the grade 8s, an indicator of what's going into grade 9. So again, we're still looking around, for sure we want it to be over 800. In the past, we've always been around 900, okay? Because also that number is also feeding into our secondary schools. And that forms the majority or the vast majority of our numbers that we would assume that would be going into grade 9, but we're also looking forward for kids from our coterminous boards. So 8 to 900, an absolute. Below that, we start to get a little concerned. So again, as I alluded to, if you look at those two numbers, columns JK and of course grade 8, you're looking at the difference, right? Now you will also notice the numbers in between, and if you could see throughout those numbers, if they maintain over 800, we're in fairly good shape going forward. Okay? If you see some dips though, sometimes those dips or blips up, sometimes those numbers will have an impression when it comes to the secondary level where you'll see a one-off. For example, if you see a group, and I believe it is one of our groups is closer to 900, when it gets in the high school, obviously that's going to push up your grade 9, and that bubble will make its way through. If it's below, let's say it's in the low 800s or even below 800, which in this case I think we're in pretty good shape, you would find that blip again in 3 or 4 years or 5 years, depending what grade it is. So if it was grade 2, so you'd be looking at 7 years from now, you're going to see there might be a struggle at the secondary situation. Let's take a look at October predicted. So go to the next page. If you look at October predicted, it's the second column from the end. And this is a really important number because you'll hear us talk about this number back in February and March and in the spring. Now these numbers are predictions, okay? These predictions are what's our best guess going forward, and we try to be fairly conservative because we base our staffing on this. If we project too much and it doesn't come through, then we're negatively impacted. And then we have to make the reverse decisions going forward, which usually means you will incur a deficit. And you don't want to put yourself in that position. So you always want to make sure that this prediction is fairly conservative. Okay? So the key part here is you identify that number, you look at the predicted number, and then you move over and you look at the actual. Okay? You'll turn to the next page, and you'll see it highlighted, the actuals. And you'll see, okay, what kind of correlation do they have? So what you end up doing is you take one, subtracting the other, and you'll see the 2 highlighted there. And in this case, you had 9,009, you subtract the 8741, and you're at 268. So that's 268 above predicted at the elementary. So that's a really good news story, okay? That's good because we staffed based on a number that was less than 268 kids. So now we can make those hirees, if you will, starting last September and into October. So this is at the elementary level. So we were up 268 from predicted. So that's a good spot to be in. Now the next feature you want to look at is actuals, which was just a couple weeks ago. Actuals are, and you've heard me say it before, those are the numbers that we must submit to the ministry. Those are the numbers that we confirm going forward. And they also substantiate many of our other numbers, not only for GSNs, but when we look at class size, et cetera, that sometimes has a role in it as well. Okay, so we have to be cognizant of that. Now, if we're looking at the actual, quite often what we're comparing though, it's the actual is apples to apples. So what do I mean by that? So apples to apples means if I take the number for 2019 and I compare with the number from 2018. Okay? And if I look at that, you'll see that we're 126 students different from actual to actual, and we're up. So that's good. So that means last year at this time, we're 126 above that, which means we're a growth board in the elementary system, which is really good news. Okay? Now you may ask, okay, 126 is great news, but sometimes you have to look at the details, and I'm not going to do that with you today, but that is in the distribution of those numbers, that 126, because that is really important. And if when we do the analysis of that, maybe we can do that in the future, you'll find quite often there's a common theme. Typically urban grows, typically rural does not. Those are typical trends, and those are some of our challenges as a board. So in this case, as I alluded to, we're up 126 students from last year, actual to actual. Now, you also know that we have 2 programs at the elementary level. One is English, and of course the other is FI. And this gives you a little bit of detail in terms of where we're at. So if you look at the English program, again, you're looking at that first column in JK. Now this separates, if you're at a dual track school, this separates the numbers. So if you're at Northeastern, or if you're at Chelmsford, trying to think of some other, Lansdowne, so though, and give me another dual track school. Yes, and so if we look at that, then we're looking at the 2 distinctive numbers. Okay, now there are some challenges with FI as it relates to enrollment, but for the sake of just identifying enrollment challenges, we want to see if the English program is up or down, and the same thing with FI. So just like we did with the entire enrollment report, we do a comparison of grade 1, and our JK rather, and grade 8, again, and then we look at the differences, what's going in and what's going out. And as we did in the previous slides, we take a look at the actuals, or predicted, sorry. We look at the predicted, and we're looking at the English program again. We're looking at predicted, and we're looking at the actuals beside it. And again, you're going to find that in the English program only. So if you'll make sure, if you have in front of you the double bar, we're 271 above predicted in the English program for elementary system, which is a good news story. So then the question is, so how do we do in the French immersion program? So again, let's go back for a second. Let's look at actuals compared to last year. So I forgot to denote that. So the actuals from last year, if we look ahead, and you can see, again, it's October 31st actuals from 2018, and then, of course, 2019, there's a difference of 67. Okay, so from year over year, we're up 67 kids on actuals. And remember, actuals is what you're funded at. Let's take a look at the French immersion programming. Again, it's a smaller group. Again, you're looking at the JK full-time, and I think right now, if you're looking at it, you have 319 JK. If you're looking at the same page I'm at. And then you're going to slide over to the grade 8 and you'll see 253. Okay. So in this case, the number of grade 8s leaving is much less than the number of JKs, which is a good thing. Okay, that shows that there's growth in that particular sector. Having said that, okay, we want to look at the actuals and the predicted to see how we fared out. So if we look at the predicted, again, just like we did in the previous, so we're looking at the predicted from 2019, and of course the actuals, and we find out we're only 3, or we're actually -3 below predicted. So that's a bit of a challenge, because we kind of just, we've met a, I don't know if it's a stalemate, if you will, but we've met a challenge, okay? So we need to make sure that as long as it's constant, because -3 is not much, okay? But that's something we need to be cognizant of, especially if there's growth in the English sector, or we have to see if there's a trend, whether we're vacillating from one year to the next. Okay. Let's take a look at, again, the actuals. And if you're looking at the French immersion piece in this case, year over year, we're at 59, whoops, I slid ahead on you. We're 59 above the actual. The other one was predicted, this is above. So it has a big difference, right? So if I'm predicting something, I'm out of whack. I mean, if you're within 10, you're doing it really well, by the way. And that's from a system perspective. So in this case, we're 59 above from last year, which is awesome. Okay? So anytime we talked about predicted, though, and actuals, just so you know, if you're in the ballpark of even 50 kids, that's really good. Okay, now, and if you're at a school, now the challenge is when you're at a school and you're making predictions, or if you're finding actuals, let's say you have 40 sites, and each site is off by 5 in the negative. Well, 40 times -5 is 200 kids at least, right? So that's where it gets challenging. And you may think as a school, though, it's only 5 kids. But multiplied by that number is huge. The other side of it, of course, if you're +5 and there's 30 or 40 schools, that's a really great piece, right? So let's take a look then at the secondary actuals. So in the secondary actual and summary enrollment, you're going to see year 1. So in this case, you have 988 students, year 1. Remember I told you earlier, we like to see them at least 900 going into grade 9. Well, in this case, you can see 988. So obviously, some kids are coming from other boards. And that's a good feature, right? Now, the challenge, of course, you want to look at year 4. Because year 4 typically is the last year, right? And you'll see in this case, there's over 1,300 students. And if you have 1,300 students in year 4, and you only have 988 in grade 9, you know, at some point you're going to say, well, is that because the people are sticking around for year 5, because sometimes what's called the victory lap, that is shrinking every year, okay? That is shrinking every year, and so that number is declining over time. The other piece, of course, is how many are we attracting from other boards, and are we, in the elementary system, providing a stable amount coming forward, the stable numbers. And again, the stable numbers for us, remember, we're looking at 800 to be stable, 900 is much better, but 800 is kind of our stability that we're looking for. Okay, so we're looking at that. But you'll notice in this case, so year 4, if we have 1,300 kids moving, 988 kids coming in, we're losing a few kids every year at the secondary level, right? I will say to you, though, without looking at trends over time, you might recall, and we'll be doing this type of report going probably in the budget time going forward, our elementary system has probably gone through its most difficult times in terms of enrollment, the challenges associated with enrollment. It's our secondary, it's still going through the blips, and it will figure itself eventually. And we're getting closer to what it should be at based on the enrollment numbers coming that are feeding it. So just so we should be aware of that. Now let's take a look at, again, it's the predicted. So you see there was, they predicted 4,300. Again, 4,300 students were predicted to start in September. And if we look at the actuals, 4,500 came in. So again, that's awesome predicting, because that puts us in a good place. Because if we're in the negative, you've already hired all those people, and it means you're looking for money. So in this case, we're in a good shape because, as you can see, we're in a position where we're 166 above predicted. So if comparing the October predicted with the October 31st actuals, we're in good shape. And secondary, it's really tough, because between September and October 31st, it's to maintain those students in the secondary schools, because they're a very transient group for the most part. There's a group that likes to move around a little bit more. And they have to decide, especially your year 4 people, or year 5 people, are they gonna hang around or not? And so that heavily influences October 31st. So we're quite pleased with how it unfolded this year. So we're up from predicted, 166. Now the next big question, of course, is if you're looking at the actuals. Okay, because the actuals is what you're actually funded at. And if we compare with last year, so you had 4,487 last year. And of course, we have 4,508 this year. So we're 21 above from last year, which is a good sign. Okay, as long as we're staying above the negative piece, we're in great shape at the secondary piece. So that's a nice piece going forward. Now again, just like we did at the elementary, we have English programming and we have French programming at the secondary level. So if you look at year 1 and you're looking at the English program, you're around 800 students in grade 9. And of course, if you shift to year 4, you're around 1,200. So you can see there's a little over 400 difference, right? So that's a bit of a gap, because if all of those kids leave and you can't replace them at the same rate, you're going to have a bit of a dip. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we can get as many kids possible going to our system. So, and you could see, just go back here for a second. Okay. As you can see, those are challenges that there's a lot of pressure, I have to tell you, at the secondary level to ensure that their enrollment figures are correct. Because typically we have to do staffing at a different time, because when you staff at the secondary level, you have to staff for the whole year. And that's very difficult to do, because you're identifying courses and pathways, and it's hard to drop them. So if your predictions are not great and you put staffing in place, then you're holding the bag for those resources, right? Those teacher resources. So it's always in a much better place to be on the conservative side. So in this case, if you're predicting, you want to be in the positives, okay? Because if you're in the negatives, you're going to pay for it, especially in the second semesters. Okay? Let's take a look at the actual. Again, this being the for looking at the actual and predicted for the secondary piece, if we just go to that, it's 189 over predicted, which is a really nice place, and that's at the English program level, right? So again, that we put ourselves and our principals in a good spot, and I know Bruce is really happy when this happens, because he does the HR piece, because it puts him in the ability where he doesn't have to pull away. Anytime you got to pull away, that can impact kids, and we don't go there. We would normally come back to you and say, we need some help, and unfortunately we don't have to go there. So I'm quite pleased about that. So let's take a look now at the actuals, because actuals, again, are very important, because that's year over year to see if we're growing or not. In this case, we're up 13 kids at the English programming at the secondary level. So that's the last column and the third from the last. So 13 above, which is pretty nice. So let's move into the French program. Again, year 1, you can see our French program is not huge at the secondary level, 189 students for year 1. Okay. And then, of course, if you slide across into year 4, it's 96. Now there's some reasons for that too, okay? Because most often, you typically, we have 4 years of French, of course, but the number of kids, typically as you're going through it, you don't have to have as many credits in the French program in order to qualify for the FI component, right? So it's not like you have to have all 30 credits. But having said that, it looks like we're in a good position for maintaining, especially what you're seeing in grade 9. If there's a flow through in that, we're going to be doing quite well going forward. So let's take a look at, again, the predicted And of course, then we're looking at the actual, and you want to see the difference of those two, because that's where you're trying to figure out whether you're ahead or not. So you had predicted 666. The actuals came in at 643. So again, that's 20, it's about 23 below. It's not bad, not bad. And that is for the French immersion program, right? So let's look at the actuals though, and that's year over year. Again, if we look at the year over year, we're actually up 8, which is good because that's a positive trend, okay? Again, though, we have to remind ourselves predicted has a big part on what the staffing looks like as of September. But we've done, I think, a remarkable job going forward. So the only other thing I really want you to note, other than looking at the details of the individual schools, and we're not going to do that today because we're only looking at the overall. You heard me state at the beginning, that all of our numbers that we generate through the enrollment typically indicate what our grants for student needs will be. So if we have 13,000 kids, it's 13,000 basically times X, okay? And I'll just, it's around 12,000, okay? So we just use that number. But what I want you to know, this column here that I've highlighted for you, section 23, those students do not count for GSNs, okay? They're funded differently. And they're funded through, and you heard the report, was it a week or two ago, about section programming? They're funded through ministry approvals. And ministry approvals typically fund teachers and or EAs. Sometimes both, but never do they include the number of students. So you would have to take those students off the total if you're looking at funds for generating the GSNs. So that's just something that's, now there's an argument, and I'll be very blunt with you. Sometimes is it more favorable to run a program without a section program? Because if you have 15 students in it, it's full funding, okay? So it depends what's at the table in terms of an agreement. So when we look at the agreement, so we do it on an annual basis, that you have to know that always is a thought that we have to have. Should we run it without or should we run it with? Typically we run it with because we want agency support. And that's one of the key determinants in terms of how we look at section 23. But that's a different discussion as well. For just in terms of the GSNs and enrollment, that's how we're affected. So if we look at, I probably could have started with this and just left it at this and just had the one slide. So what you have here, of course, you have the two panels and you have the total, right? So you have elementary and secondary. So what you had, we had 268 predicted above over the previous year. Turns out we're actually 126 over actuals from last year, which is great. Secondary, you can see we were up 166 predicted, which is awesome. And the actual 21 over from last year, because that's apples to apples, and these are apples to apples, correct? And so you can see the totals, 434 predicted above what we predicted, which is awesome. And of course, 147 over last year. And of course, you can see that bottom number. So our new number going forward is 13,517, which is a nice trajectory going forward. If we were going to look at individual schools, and we might in the near future, what we'd be looking at is grade to grade comparisons and to see where grade 1 ends up in grade 8 based on predictions. That is much more intense, and you'd be looking for different types of patterns at that particular time. But this should give you a fairly good view of what we have going forward, and that I think you would say that, and I'm looking at Dennis and the superintendents, they would suggest you that we're in a very favorable position based on the numbers that came in. And I will say to you, hats off to the principals, and of course the superintendents, because the superintendents monitor their predictions, of course, and as they're submitted, and we revisit them continuously to make sure that we're in a good spot. And at the end of the day, when we get the numbers in, we make those modifications that we alluded to in September in terms of staffing and resourcing going forward in order to reflect the new numbers that were coming forward. So really pleased about that going forward as a result of the numbers that I'm telling you about today. And secondly, hopefully there is some good news about in terms of our estimates and our GSNs as a result of these numbers as well. So that, Madam Chair, is the end of the presentation. Questions?
Trustee Cosmerly.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. This is great news. I just wanted to know about the Victory Lap, about the year 5. Do we have any idea what the numbers are? And we are not funded for those students. I just wanted, we are funded for them?
It all depends where they are in their, if they're over their, you have a maximum number of credits, right? If they're above it, okay, let's say, and I forget the numbers, it's 34. So if they're above, let's say they wanted to come back for number 35 and 36, if they have all the requirements for an OSSD, we're funded at a much lesser amount. So it's kind of like we're funded at, and I'm looking at Dennis, and I think it's like the adult rate, yes, which is significantly lower. I mean, it's okay, but significantly lower. I can't remember offhand how much it was the adult ed, the funding for a GSN per
Sorry,
pupil.
not the funding. I just wanted to know if we knew how many students were doing their Victory Lap.
Oh, I couldn't tell you that based
No.
on the numbers I have in front of you today. Okay.
Trustee St. Jean.
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm curious about the French immersion secondary school enrollments. How do you identify the students that are in French immersion, like recognizing that 10 credits are required to receive a French immersion high school diploma, but when we see the numbers drop in grades 11 and 12, is there a checkbox that's indicated when they're doing their course selection, I'm French immersion or not? How do we find out who those students are?
And so that's a really good challenge, and that's one of the challenges a principal has to face in terms of creating pathways. Because you're right, there's a basic requirement. We have to have X amount of credits in French, right? And so once they've accumulated those numbers, they typically, the number that are open to them in French is diminished significantly because there's just not the volume in order for the offerings in French in grade 11 and grade 12. Because most kids will have attained most of the credits for sure by grade 11. So grade 12, not very often you would see. So let's say if I wanted to offer math, okay, in grade 12, and let's say it's functions and relations, and I want to do it in French, I need to find a minimum of, we'll say, the average class size is around 22. Let's say it's 22. No, in this case it'd be 25 because it's going to be an open class. Okay, it needs to be at least 25. It's very rare you would find that number of children to be in that class. So it just wouldn't be an offered. It just couldn't be offered. Now, the only way you can get around that if you have a much larger student population. So that's where volume is really important in secondary schools because then you can offer more opportunities, right? So go ahead.
So in a French immersion program, you need 10 credits. The only credit you're required to have in grade 12 is Francais. And so quite often, all of your electives are taken in grade 9 and 10, leaving you the room for the sciences and maths that are so heavy in grade 11 and 12. So many of the times you're going to have students taking 2 Frenches in grade 11, so they will be taking 0 credits in grade 12. So it's just the way it's stacked inside the secondary school program. All the electives are very heavy in grade 9 and 10. Very few senior electives in Francais.
Trustee Gibson.
Thank you, Chair Dewar. Through you to Director Blazak. I'm just curious, considering that our funding is based on these figures, are these figures externally audited, internally audited, and if so, how often? And just a brief explanation.
So it's a great question. We have to submit these to the ministry, okay? And they're subject to audits, and often we get audited by internally, and we're subject to audit externally. When they're submitted, of course, those numbers, in fact, October 31st is not even the deadline. We have to wait for another 15 days before those numbers become firm because the requirements for attendance doesn't stop until the 15th day after October 31st. So there's a significant number of requirements that we must meet in order to be established as actuals. Although they have dates, and I identified 31st of October, 31st of March. Those are the 2 dates. They each represent 50%, okay, of the funding. Okay, so there are 2 times throughout the year that you have to submit those numbers, and you have, I mean, you're trying to maintain them. Because in order, if you don't, you're going to lose substantial, at least 50%. It'll go against that 50%, right? So, but yes, we're subject to those audits all the time. And there are attendance audits, but there are GSN audits too, because GSNs are very closely aligned, obviously, with the enrollment numbers. Now, and I'll remind everyone, because Superintendent Basnet always reminds me, it's not always the GSNs that determine all of the dollar amounts, because it gets very complicated. But it is a pretty good measure in terms of identifying where we're at. Okay.
Well, obviously, we've learned everything there is to know about enrollments. But we always do appreciate more information, and I'm sure that after we've had a closer look at this, there may be other questions that come up, and that's fine. But I do want to say that this is pretty good news. Like, we've had some good news in the last couple of years, and every year that if it's +2, it doesn't matter. +2 is still better than -2. And so our enrollment numbers going up are extremely appreciated. And they illustrate, as Director Blazek said, the good work that is happening in our schools by our staff and by our principals and superintendents and so on. So, thank you very much. Report from the in-camera committee, the whole meeting of the board. There is none. Old business, previous minutes, motion that the minutes of the special board meeting held on October 16th, 2019 be approved. Moved by Trustee Morrison, seconded by Trustee Cosmerly. All in favor? Approved. Carried, sorry. Motion that the minutes of the regular board meeting held on October 22nd, 2019 be approved. Moved by Trustee Cosmerly, seconded by Trustee Stringer. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Tenders and requests for proposal, nil. Reports and recommendation from board committees, and the first one is from the Audit Committee. And I'd like to call on Dennis to lead us through this. Superintendent of Business.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Essentially, this is brought forward from the Audit Committee, and there is a one-page report that is part of the package, and it outlines the proposed internal audit for the current year, 1920, as well as the proposed internal audit for the year 2020-2021.
So you'll find that in your backup. Any questions or? Okay, I'm going to read the motion. Motion that the 2019-2020 internal audit plan and the multi-year internal audit plan be approved. Moved by Trustee Morrison, seconded by Trustee Stringer. All in, are you voting or? No. Trustee Gibson.
Thank you, Chair Dewar. Regarding the audit plan and the multi-year internal audit plan, has nothing, it's a multi-year plan, so it's been going for a couple of years, so there's been no changes, we're just going forward, like, normally we would, I thought around this time of year we would get an annual report from the audit committee. So we'll be getting that next month in December? I thought it was November 30.
I will call on the superintendent of business to answer.
Yes, those are two separate reports.
No, I understand that.
And we have the next audit committee is set for December 10th. And after that committee meeting, there will be the annual report that comes forward to the board.
Okay, and that's where you would highlight if there were any changes and the summary of what's been completed. And I'm just assuming, since this has been put forward, you've already had those discussions about what's been completed this year and whether we need to change focus or whether we're continuing on with the plan. It's just they haven't been reported yet. Is that the case?
So essentially, at the audit committee, the previous one, we reviewed the internal audit reports of internal audits that were completed. What you have in front of you is the plan for current year as well as next year.
Okay, and that hasn't changed in terms of the multi-year plan? It's the same? We're just
It's the
continuing
update.
to follow the plan?
It's the update to previous plans.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. New business. The honorarium for trustees, and I'll call on the superintendent of business, Bazinet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The calculation of the honoraria is included in the backup, and essentially it's been adjusted to reflect the increases in the enrollment. Therefore, there is a slight increase in the honoraria based on the enrollment increases from the previous year.
Trustee Morrison.
Thank you. Just through you, just a comment. I think this is the first time since this honorarium formula was figured out that we've actually got a slight increase. Because I remember every year we just go through how much we're losing every year. So just want to make a point of it. Thank you. It's not a big amount, but it's appreciated. Thank you.
Superintendent of Business, Bazinet, would you also like to take us through the trustee expenditures, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Included in the package as well is a summary of the trustee expenses for the fiscal year 2018-2019. It is essentially the same format as been presented in previous years, and it outlines the various columns to differentiate the various expenses, and it's listed for every trustee as well as the student trustee. So the grand total, if we look on the bottom right-hand corner, for last fiscal year was $114,880. And just point of information, the funding under the governance allocation for last year was $135,438. So as the total expenses are well within the allocation grant for governance.
Trustee Morrison.
Again, through you, Madam Chair, just a comment to the Superintendent of Business. Thank you, Dennis, for that report. And I'm very pleased to see again that we are beneath our funding levels. I don't think there's been a time since I've been a trustee that we've exceeded that funding envelope. So I thank you for, again, pointing that out. And if I could go back to the previous, just because I think it's important to talk about the amount the honorarium has gone up as a result of increases in enrollment. Dennis, if I read this correctly, it looks like then the base amount, the increase to honorariums is $33?
Yes, from the previous report, the essentially the base has not changed. It's the adjustment for enrollment, and the difference or the increase is $33.46
And
per year.
that's the annual increase of
That is
$33.
correct.
Thank you.
Trustee Gibson.
Thank you, Chair Dewar. Through you to Superintendent Bazinet. So I did have a look at the trustee expenses over the last couple of years. That figure you mentioned of $135,438, is that a static figure or is that changes from year to year
It varies slightly from year to year.
based on enrollment? Or?
It's based on the formula in Section 10 of the grants.
Okay, because I
So
did.
it's within EFIS, and it's a ministry calculation.
Okay, because I did see one year where we were up to 143,000, so it has come down considerably. I did have a question too, just about the format of the report, because I found out when I questioned one of the expenses that, for example, my Yellow Pages listing is included under internet. Then I look at that heading and it used to be fax and internet. So I just, it can be a little confusing as to what actually comes under each heading. And I did notice for some trustees, like for example, I assume all trustees are furnished with a computer, yet some people don't have that expense listed beside their name. So I was just curious why there might be some inconsistencies like that.
So under the report, under the heading computers and printers, it would show an amount only in the year that a trustee would receive a new computer. So based on last year, 2 trustees received a new computer, whereas previous trustees would have held the one they had previously.
Supplementary, if I may, because there was 3 new trustees plus the Indigenous trustees, so I'm only seeing 2 computers. That's why I was, if we could defer to Carrie, did you get a computer?
I have access to a laptop, yes, but I'm not sure if it was purchased new or.
Well, mine wasn't new.
Yeah.
Mine was a used laptop, so that doesn't make a difference, does it? Or
I'm looking at George, and yes, it does.
okay,
Yeah,
So it may vary based on the source of the device.
the reason I'm asking is because I looked back under my predecessor. There was no charge for her for a computer, but my computer obviously belonged to her because it had her name on it. So I'm assuming it was issued to her at some point, but then it was reissued to me, but I'm the one that shows the expense, so it's just a little confusing to me.
We'll have to verify our processes.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Trustee Morrison?
Just one more quick supplementary comment. Again, I'm looking at the overall numbers. I'm seeing the expenditures on this line. So this is for trustees' honorariums, their mileage expenses, conferences, accommodation costs, cell phones, internet, computers, and printers. Our total in the 18-19 fiscal year was $114,880 against an overall budget, board budget, I think, of $203 million. Just want to point that out as a percentage of our overall budget costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't feel valued. This is, I'm going to call on Superintendent Bazinet for the budget development process. Oh, did I miss? Oh, the insurance renewal, sorry, thank you. I'll call on you to talk to us about that insurance renewal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, this is an annual report that comes to the board as well as a motion, and we've included some of the backup of information received from OSB, which is our insurer. And one of the pages would list the invoice amount for the year 2020, which is a total premium of $235,388.88. What is missing this year on that page, if you look at it, is under number 3, boiler and machinery. It says to be invoiced separately. It's because they did not have information at the time of sending us this invoice. Last year, that premium was approximately $5,000. So we will be receiving an additional invoice in the next month or so for whatever amount for boiler and machinery coverage, estimated somewhere in that order as well. Also, if you look at the last page related to the OSB, it's the refund for the year 2019, the current calendar year. And we see that, once again, our board is receiving a premium refund, and this year we have received $71,682.
Thank you very much, Trustee Morrison.
The refund that we got on premiums, Dennis, is that just because boards overpaid the OSBI consortium on insurance costs, or is it because of good performance and we've reduced our liability?
Essentially, the annual refund is based on the overall performance of the entire education group. Therefore, it's based on performance. And we have seen refunds, I believe, continuously over multiple years, certainly the last 3 that I've been here. But it is based on performance, not overpayment of premiums.
Thank you very much. Trustee Gibson.
Thank you, Chair Dewar. Through you to Superintendent Bazinet. I'm noticing an increase in our property square footage. Is that additions or additional things that we've had to add? Could you just explain a little bit about that particular line?
Yes, essentially, when you look at the square footage, we did have additional square footage as related to the additional gym at Confederation, as well as this is for next year, 2020. Therefore, we also have to include the square footage of the multi-use facility at the LaSalle site.
Trustee Cosmerly.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the Director of Business, what is it that they mean by legal expense?
This is a new coverage that we will have, and 2 examples of where this insurance would be of value to the board is if we are involved with any type of human rights action against the board. This coverage would be applicable, as well as any contractual disputes as it relates to construction. And given that we are planning to move into construction of our new school, it is very timely coverage as well.
Trustee Gibson.
Thank you, Chair Dewar. Through you to Superintendent Bazinet. Just regarding your answer to that last question, do you have an approximate ballpark figure of what we spend on legal expenses in a calendar year or fiscal year?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
Well, I'm just trying to understand if we're spending an extra $15,000 for coverage, what sort of amounts we're spending on legal expenses to require that sort of coverage. Does that?
Well, essentially, legal expenses are, there's a multitude of expenses because we could incur legal costs as it relates to grievances, whereas this type of coverage is limited to the types of examples that I've given.
Supplementary, if I may, like, for example, a human rights claim, which was the example you used, what's the average cost of going to the tribunal if that were to happen?
I really don't have that figure this evening. Although, once again, we've seen primarily, not necessarily through our experience, but the possibility and risk management that it may occur more and more in the future, and therefore that's why we've decided to purchase the insurance.
To offset the risk, okay.
It's a risk management issue.
Perfect, thank you.
Motion that the 2020 renewal of insurance for liability, property, crime, and fleet automobile with the Ontario School Board's Insurance Exchange for $235,388.88 be approved. Moved by Trustee Gibson, seconded by Trustee Dubosky. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. And you're still on board for the budget development process, Superintendent Blazek. Yeah. Bazinet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, in your package, you'll also have a one-page report which summarizes the budget development process for the fiscal year 2020-2021, so therefore begins September of 2020. It is a time of year where we have actually the overlap of all our financial cycles. We are completing the financial statements for last year that ended August 31st, 2019. We are currently working on the revised budget for 2019-2020, and now we begin also the process of establishing the budget for September of 2020. So essentially the dates align with past dates in terms of format, and of course these are targeted dates, much of which is based on receiving timely information from the Ministry of Education, which are the grants for student needs. And at this point, all indications are the ministry plans to maintain the March 31st, 2020 as the target date for the release of that information.
Thank you very much. Trustee Gibson?
Thank you, Chair Dewar, through you to Superintendent Bazinet. Regarding the invitation to the educational community, could you just expand on who that would be? Give some examples.
Yes, essentially we send out an email with a PDF form attachment. It is sent to all the schools to share with their school councils. It is sent to all trustees. It is sent to all unions and federations. I believe that's pretty well the target group.
Supplementary, if I may. Approximately how many responses do we receive year to year? Does it vary much, or is it always about the same? Or
Essentially, in my tenure, the past 3 years, I would say on average it was about 6 submissions, and the most was in the first year I was here, where it was slightly over 10 to 12. And most of the submissions are for increased spending.
thank you.
No. Levying motion. Motion, sorry. Thank you. Motion that the 2020-2021 budget development process be approved. Moved by Trustee Stringer, seconded by Trustee Clement. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Levying education taxes bylaw. Superintendent Bazinet.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In your package, you would have bylaw number 2019-02. And once again, this is an annual requirement that the board pass motions that the tax levy, as directed by the Ministry of Education, be approved at a board level. And everyone will recall that boards no longer set the mill rate or property taxes. It is all set centrally by the province.
Motion that the levying education taxes for 2020 bylaw as attached be deemed to have been read 3 times and approved. Moved by Trustee Morrison, seconded by Trustee Clement. Trustee Gibson.
Thank you, Chair Dewar, through you to Superintendent Bazinet again. I asked about these last time, and I understand that it's just procedural. Is it just a holdover from previously when we did set the mill rate? Like, I'm just surprised it hasn't been updated. Like, we don't really get any detailed information that comes with this. We're just sort of going through the motion of passing the motions. That's why I'm a little bit confused as to the necessity of it. Is it Is it something that just was never changed from before, or
Through you,
like,
Madam
why do we do it, basically, is my question.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's a requirement under the Education Act, and it has not changed in that sense. Is boards are still required to approve this. However, the boards do not have the authority, or no longer have the authority to set any rates. But there's still a requirement under the Education Act to pass this motion.
Okay, and supplementary, if I may, have we ever at any point asked why it's still a necessity, or asked for it to?
No.
No, thank you.
Trustee Morrison?
I'm supporting this. We have to do it. It's regulation. My question is, are we still acting as quasi-tax collectors for some small unorganized, small townships? We used to do tax collection through the island. One of our townships was a partner with us and did actual tax collection.
I'll have to research that. I'm not aware of that.
Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. The Public Education Symposium, the OBSPA-PAS, is coming up in January, at January 23rd to the 25th in Toronto. So we have a motion that the board approve the attendance of the following trustees at the Public Education Symposium 2020 in Toronto, January 23rd to the 25th, 2020. Is there anyone that would like to put their name down to attend? Trustee let's start over there. Trustee St. Jean, Trustee Clement, Trustee Gibson, Trustee Cosmerly, Trustee Morrison. Thank you very much. Moved by Trustee DeBozic, seconded by Trustee Morrison. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Request for leave of absence, motion that Judy Hunda and Colleen Govro be granted a leave of absence from the November 19th, 2019 board meeting. Moved by Trustee Cosmerly, seconded by Trustee Stringer. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. Director's remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just 3 points I'd like to make tonight. Just want to remind everybody about the Remembrance Day in terms of art participation. One of our challenges each year is that we have to decide whether we're local or whether we're community, or in some cases maybe it's neighborhood versus community. So in Sudbury, it is, do you go to the Sudbury Arena or do you have it at your neighborhood school? So I think we've done a nice balance of this over the last number of years. I've fortunately been at the Sudbury Arena for the last few, and I will tell you, without Rainbow Kids there, it would look pretty sparse. And so I'm very proud of the number of students that do go there. I know, for instance, this year Churchill had all their grade 4s through to grade 8 to 10, which is a significant number. And a number of other schools were there, of course. But I wanted to point out that their demeanor and their how they handle, because it's quite long when you get there at 10:15, because they ask you to be there early until 12:15. It's a long time to be standing and being quiet, and our kids were remarkable this year. So I have to really give my hats off to the staff and to the kids. So I'm very pleased by that. And we'll continue to make that commitment. The other piece I want to let you know, there are some jurisdictions, and I'm going to highlight Chelmsford Valley District Composite School. And that was Danielle Williamson, the principal there. And she called me and she said, do you mind if I take the busing that you would normally provide? Because the board provides 2 buses. So the board takes on that cost. She said, would you mind if we took on the cost that's getting chairs so we can support the local community initiative. And I said, yeah, okay, it's a bit of a stretch for me. But then the feedback was, and this is the part you need to know, a veteran was there and commenters said, now at least I have faith that it will continue. Because without the kids being there, they couldn't see it going beyond a very short term. And so it really creates a bond with the community when we can act with the community, but knowing full well that it's really important that we support the community school as well. And some of the events are extremely moving at the school level. So I mean, I think the board does a really nice job of working with both levels. So I appreciate that and extend a level of thanks to all of the various folks that were there, whether it was trustees or staff. You should know this Friday is a PD Day, and our theme is based on the Truth and Reconciliation, our commitment to action. We'll be featuring Kevin Lemru and Pam Toulouse. They'll be there on the island, I believe, for the morning, for a half day, and then they'll be coming at the convention center at Little Current, and then they'll be coming into Sudbury for the afternoon, and they'll be at the Radisson. So for the other half a day, it'll be individual staffs working with their with commitment to action and walking through the document that you've seen time and time again. So it'll be their first real initiative in terms of, or an opportunity rather, to look at this initiative and to see what it actually means going forward and to raise questions and to speak to it, etc. So we're really excited about this. And finally, the other thing is I call this a Cyril Varney Public Schools success story. And it just happened yesterday, so bear with me for a second. So defibrillators were installed 2 weeks ago at the school. Staff were trained because we provide them with a video, because that's all it takes just to watch this video. And it was provided by Health and Safety right after it was installed. So on Monday, being yesterday of this week, during assembly, the custodian collapsed. And 4 members leapt into action. Okay. Following a process laid out by the defibrillator instructions, staff applied a compression and paddle procedures. Okay? So 3 times the defibrillator was utilized. And during this quick action, staff as well called 911. Okay? The ambulance arrived fairly quickly, within 10 minutes of the call, and then the paramedics took over. Again, after 10 minutes of interventions by the ambulatory care unit, the patient was brought to the hospital. Although it needs to be noted that this time, staff did not know what the outcome was. A volunteer fire personnel returned to the school after several minutes had gone by to share the outcome. And he indicated that our custodian was in very serious condition, but was looking good. Then he said to the staff, if not for the quick action on your part, she would not have made it. And as you can manage, the staff were quite overwhelmed. So we have our in-house heroes. So our in-house heroes were, and I'm going to say Sarah, Jocelyn, Shannon, and of course, Principal Kendra Myhel. These 4 people there's very little training when it comes to the defibrillators, right? And it's basically you follow these procedures and it tells you what to do. And I was over there talking to one of the 2 of the folks there today, actually 3 of them, and I was speaking with Jocelyn, and she said and she's had some training, and she said it was difficult though because when you apply the defibrillator, the paddles, and it goes off, it's a very violent reaction, and you assume that the person's being hurt, and it's very hard on a person who's not trained in order to see this transpire. But the machine tells you compressions, defib. Compressions, defib. It is very prescriptive because it's able to monitor what you need to do. So they had to do it 3 times, and they did it extremely well. And to their credit, we have a person that is still surviving in hospital care right now, but is surviving here today. So we're grateful to them. But I also want to thank David Digby, our health and safety guru, and as well as SOs Burgett and Bazineau. And I'll tell you why. Because it wasn't until this year, in fact, up until I think September, we only had defibrillators at our secondary sites. And so we put in all of our elementary schools, and as I alluded to, only 2 weeks ago did we put it in at Cyril Varney. So it was only the grace of that goodwill and their steadfast resolve to ensure that we have health and safety is at the forefront, that we had folks able to access this and to initiate it and to respond to a very difficult situation. So again, I thank them for their foresight, and I also want to thank the trustees, because without the dollars that was in the health and safety budget, this would not have happened. And so it's really critical that we ensure that sometimes when we do budget cuts, sometimes we have to really think about, okay, so what are we looking at? Or if we're increasing budgets, what do we really need to be looking at? A defibrillator costs about $1,600. But when you're multiplying that by 40 or 45 sites, I mean, it adds up, right? But we saved a life yesterday. And so I just want to thank all of you, and of course the staff, and of course the quick action of the staff at Sir Varney. I will say, yesterday were on a high, and then there was a lot of tense moments because they didn't know the outcome. And today it's kind of a little bit of a letdown because they realized what they went through. And but we've turned 4 people into champions about defibrillators and about the training that is required through first aid. And they said never will they ever turn an opportunity away to be trained now in first aid. So which was music to my ears. But it was outstanding that these 4 individuals did what they did. And again, I congratulate all of you for making sure that apparatus was there today. So thank you.
OBSPA delegate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick note also on that defibrillator. My fire crew are highly trained on this stuff here, and we train all the time, and our bag is the same bag as you'd carry on an ambulance. And to see these 4 people to take over on that defibrillator, I have to give them full kudos. It goes to show you the importance of it, but the ease that this machine will give you the instructions through the thing. But it's not just that. Sometimes people just don't have the composure for it, and they did. So kudos to them. Thank you much. This weekend, it's a bit changed. We're meeting with the directors this weekend. It's a little bit different that we're not going on Friday. We're going Saturday this time. And it's going to be 3 days because we're meeting informally with the Northern Board Saturday night. And then we meet with the Southern Boards Saturday. But on Monday, we're meeting in the morning. And then we're going by bus, I guess, to meet our MPPs in the afternoon. And I guess part of that is to talk about the ongoing negotiations, I guess, and trying to talk about the MPs. But for the Northern Board, principally is to talk to our MPs about, if you all have seen the letter that we had drawn together. It's a rather lengthy letter about the wants of Northern Ontario, and pointing out all the factors that that what's not necessarily legislation down south doesn't always work for boards in the north. And we've worked on this project for about 3 years and 3 different ministers. So we're going to be meeting with Minister Leachy and trying to get him to come to one of our Northern Board meetings. And when we do that, we're hoping that we can advocate for the north, and we'll see how it goes on Monday, and I'll bring back a report after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Trustee Clement. Trustees' remarks / questions. Trustee DeBozic.
Okay, just on the our staff who stepped up and saved the life of another human being, is there an opportunity to nominate them to the St. John's Life Saving Award, as well as an opportunity to have them officially recognized here?
If I may, Madam Chair, absolutely. There's always opportunities for that. In fact, we have a process, of course, that we can have them. We can recognize them as a board, A, and then B, there are also special awards throughout the course of the year, which can be nominated for. And of course, we have our own in-house awards at the end of the school year. So there are, yes, you're absolutely right. There are a number of opportunities.
It would be nice to have them recognized here and to have them officially recognized in that capacity, and that way it will instill, that courage in other members of staff we have.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and we will see that we make sure that we follow up on that, and thank you very much for recommending it. Chairperson's remarks. This year, 2 Rainbow District School Board teachers were honored with a Top 40 Under 40 award presented by the Northern Ontario Business. Sincere congratulations to Katie Shell Aerosmith of R.H. Murray Public School and Amanda Kingsley Mallow of Valley View Public School. Lockerbie Composite School Cancer Drive raised $42,000 for the Pediatric Oncology Program of the Northeast Cancer Center at Health Sciences North. Since its inception 24 years ago, I can't believe it was that long ago, the drive has contributed over $984,000. That's almost $1 million for pediatric cancer care in the North. Congratulations to Lockerbie. Rainbow Schools made this winter a little warmer by participating in the winter clothing drive powered by Cooper Equipment Rentals in support of our children. Our future. A total of 18,487 items were collected, with students, staff, and school communities contributing 4,962 items. Thank you for all the donations. Circle your calendars. The Free to Be Me conference for grades 7 and 8 students will take place this Thursday, November the 21st, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Lockerbie Composite School. A similar conference will be held for grade 9 to 12 students this spring. Also, to add to your calendar, the talented students from Sudbury Secondary School are presenting Alice in Wonderland in the Sheridan Auditorium. The public is invited to performances on Friday, November 22nd, and Saturday, November 23rd at 7 p.m. There's also a matinee to take place on Sunday, November 24th at 2 p.m. Tickets are $15 for adults and $10 for seniors and students. Everyone is welcome. On Thursday, December the 5th, 2019, students in Rainbow Schools in Sudbury, Espanola, and Manitoulin will canvass their neighborhoods for non-perishable food items for their local food banks. This is the 6th annual Rainbow Kids Helping Kids Day, and it's part of our annual efforts to support the food drive in memory of Edgar Burton. And I know our schools and our staff really do a wonderful job with that. The board is currently accepting nominations for the Joan Mantle Music Trust Community Award. If you know someone who shared Joan Mantle's passion for music, for education, for all ages, has had a positive impact on music in the community and promotes lifelong music education, serves as an inspiration to others through their musical contributions, please consider nominating them for the award. The deadline for nominations is January 17th, so you have a full month and more to take a really close look at people, actually 2 months. Grade 8 students and their parents are invited to secondary school information nights at all Rainbow Secondary Schools. Please check the board website for dates and times. Excuse me. On August 21st, 1942, 77 years ago, the original Walt Disney movie, Bambi, was released, and it included many life lessons. One of the lessons came from Bambi's little bunny friend, Thumper, who said, "If you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all." Too often, in today's world of technology, Thumper's words are forgotten, and our young people are suffering. If you can't say something nice, then the chances are you will say something not nice. And repeating that is bullying, especially on social media. Our young people read that and they're affected by it. It follows them. So, the thought for the month is a slight revision to Thumper's words of wisdom. It is, if you can't say or post something nice, don't say or post nothing at all. Thank you very much. Take a quick look at information and proposals. There's Special Education Advisory Committee minutes from October the 2nd. And take a look, please, at our future meetings. Trustee Morrison.
I just want to thank you for the letter that was sent to the ministry.
Oh, right.
Ministry, thanking them for the approval to proceed on the capital projects as per our motion at the last board meeting. So thank you.
Yes, and thanks for pointing that out. I wanted to mention it. Check the times and dates for all these meetings. Anybody see anything that needs correcting? Thank you very much. I want to remind trustees and staff to remain for a brief in-camera session after this meeting, at the conclusion of this meeting. Motion that we do now adjourn, moved by Trustee St. Jean, seconded by Trustee DeBozic. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.